Hello and welcome, glad you're here. Bicycle Touring Talk is basically story time about the adventures I was lucky enough to live because I discovered bicycle touring. This is episode 54. I am George Schlacek,
the one and only.
After an overnight stop at a deserted beach in northern Panama, I had moved on to a town called Sonå. The hotel I had found was apparently the only one in town. It was really basic. The bathroom was down the hall, and the room was flooded with light from the street outside. Plain fatigue had me fall asleep easily anyways. But the night didn't pass smoothly. The room had no air conditioning and it was pretty hot, despite the fan that was running at medium speed all night. I woke up drenched in sweat and something didn't feel right. This was trip 1 to the bathroom. I hope you're not watching this at dinner time. Let's just say I had diarrhea about as bad as it gets. Besides that, I was feeling fine for whatever that's worth. I definitely blamed the problem on the ice cream cup I had enjoyed after dinner. It was a repeat occurrence as the same kind of ice cream had made me sick in Bocas del Toro days earlier. The big risk with diarrhea in intense heat and on a bicycle tour is dehydration. I knew that. There wasn't really much for me in Sonå, so staying here was out of the question. Santa Catalina was just under 70 kilometers away. It would be easy enough to get there even with a minor poop problem, or so I thought. By the time I checked out of the hotel, it was pretty hot outside. I slapped on a thick layer of sunscreen and hit the road, stopping for Gatorade and soda pop at every opportunity simply to keep hydrated. The diarrhea had me stop several times during the ride to find privacy in ditches and behind bushes. It got really gross when I ran out of toilet paper. Eating dinner? Well, sorry, but you can't say this comes without warning. This was also the worst day for sore butt cheeks from the constant rubbing on the cheap bicycle seat I had on the bike at the time. Some learn slowly, but this really taught me a lesson. After that day, I'd be stuck in Santa Catalina until my skin healed. Hopefully, the poop problem would be over sooner. No more ice cream for me on this trip. I was well enough to stop for a normal lunch of rice, beans, beef, and vegetables. My stomach was feeling fine. Lunch also came with lots of cold water. The last 15 or so kilometers to Santa Catalina were especially rough and hilly, but my condition wasn't worsening. I was actually increasing my distances between poop breaks quite considerably. Just when I thought all was going to be well, another problem happened. My front rack was broken on the right-hand side. It was barely hanging on, so I shifted my luggage around to make that pannier as light as possible and went on at a slower pace. I was at a loss at how to fix this rack good enough for me to make it all the way to Panama City. Panamanian roads aren't really that bad, but I had plenty of stuff to haul, and transferring it to the other panniers definitely could have caused them to break. Was it time to get rid of stuff? First, I was going to find a place on the beach. The rack could wait a day or two. I'd figure something out. When I finally reached Santa Catalina, I was amazed at how far spread out it was. There were some hostels and restaurants right in the village, but they were either full or a bit too expensive. A dirt road led to more places, and I eventually got lucky at a place that was still kind of unfinished. However, There was a group of young surfers from Germany, and the owner didn't mind making another $10 per night by renting me a room that was lacking a door and window. The place had a great vibe, and the price was right. I paid for 2 nights. That evening I didn't do very much except hang out with the people at the hostel. I only had a light snack for supper, hoping not to aggravate my digestive tract that seemed to be almost back to normal. The beach was beautiful here, and there was company to enjoy it with, even if I wasn't a surfer. The next day was March 17th. I figured out what distance I had left to go to Panama City, and it definitely wasn't a 2-week ride. All of a sudden, it seemed like I had all the time in the world. The next morning was spent figuring out what to do with my broken rack. I had lots of help from my hosts at the hostel who supplied some strong wire. I also found a perfect tree branch and turned it into a brace attached to the rack with zip ties. This seemed pretty solid. I would still shift some of the heavier stuff to the rear panniers, but now I had confidence in my rack again. After a late lunch, I decided that I was extending my stay for another day, making Santa Catalina the only place so far that I had spent more than 2 nights at. My sore butt still needed a break, and I enjoyed exploring the area and its beaches. With my bike, riding carefully, barely touching the seat. I watched the fishermen and their catch. Some kids playing soccer in town, and had some drinks with other tourists I met in the village. The only thing I didn't have was another ice cream. The store here also had the same kind that I had had before. This time I wasn't going to make the same mistake. Day 2 of relaxing in Santa Catalina was probably the slowest day of my trip up to that point. Life seemed perfect here. The weather, the ocean, the food, and the Balboa beer. It all made me want to just get stuck here for a while and forget about returning home. That's kind of what happens when you come close to reaching the end of a major bicycle tour. There were some anxious moments thinking about reality. Winter would be over by the time I got home, but it would take months for summer to fully arrive, and I was gonna have to find a new job before my money would run out. At the end of the day, I got a little reminder of the cycling reality. My bike had a soft rear tire after coming back from the beach. Yes, it was a flat, just from cruising around the area. It turned out to be a piece of wire that had punctured the tube. I'd have to buy more patches soon. The next day, I was going to return back to Sonå for another night, then probably Santiago the following day. I left Santa Catalina March 19th after fixing yet another flat tire. It was the same tube I had fixed the previous day, but a different spot. Another patch took care of the leak, but I never found the cause of it. It had to be another small piece of glass. In the end, I decided to use my spare tire as a preventive measure. The ride to Sonå was easy, but the sun was very intense. Once in town, I asked around for other options beside that weird hotel that I had stayed at before. Sonå was a big enough town, and it was hard to believe there was only one hotel. Locals told me that there had been another one, but it had gone out of business. I ended up in the same room as the first time around, and the experience was not great. Well, first, the regular guy who was in charge of the keys didn't show up for work. There was a guy at the reception willing to check me in, but while he gave me the correct room key, he didn't have a key for the front door.
No es cerrada,
he told me. He was correct. Once I got to the building, the front door was unlocked. I got settled back into my room, but headed out for supper shortly after. By the time I got back, it was dark outside, and, surprise, surprise, the front door was locked now. I'm not sure if you've seen my previous video. The reception was in another location halfway across town where they rented out bungalows by the week. I had to walk there and ask the guy to give me a key or let me into the building. But since there was only one guy, it took another hour or so before he could walk over with me to unlock the door. The night wasn't much better. I fell asleep, only to wake up again late at night because someone outside on the street was yelling. This man was causing quite a riot all by himself. I wanted to open my window and tell him to F off, but decided to ignore him instead. Eventually, it got quiet. But as soon as I had dozed off again, this guy was back, throwing stuff against the windows. Later, it turned out this man was a longer-term guest who had failed to extend his stay. He must have thought he could pay up later and still sneak in meanwhile. In the morning, the police was looking for him. I was glad to leave Sonå in the morning after an almost sleepless night. My ride was just over 50 kilometers and took me to Santiago, a city I had been to before, but not really explored much. Jessica and I had spent a night in a hotel near the bus terminal the previous winter. The experience was entirely different by bicycle, and I actually really liked the place. The hotel I found was old and cheap. Perfect, I thought, especially since they let me check in early. It was only 1 p.m. or so, but I was dead tired and glad to be in a room. Once again, there was no AC, but I had a private bathroom. After a semi-warm shower, I went to bed for a couple of hours. A much-needed nap. Later, I got up and explored Santiago on foot. I had a great supper at a pizza place and finally returned to my room after dark. Since I was drenched in sweat from the hot day and it was warm in my room, I took another shower. First, I went to bed with only a light sheet on me, but soon it became apparent that this room was a favorite hangout for hundreds of mosquitoes. Where were they all coming from? Some investigating revealed that the window didn't shut properly and was lacking a screen. My insect repellent was no match for the swarm of bloodsuckers that was attacking me now. It seemed like a perfect recipe for contracting dengue and perhaps even yellow fever or malaria. The only way to deal with the situation was to get out my sleeping bag, put on my hoodie, and sleep all wrapped up, only part of my face exposed. Within minutes I was cooking, but eventually adapted to the heat and actually slept okay. Well, at least compared to the previous night, but it was far from a great night. Are budget hotels worth it? Sometimes. March 21st was a relatively short day on the road. just under 50 kilometers to Oku. The ride was good. Oku was an interesting town. There was a large agricultural center that was about to host a fair, or seemed like it was permanently set up for it. Finally, I found a decent place with a clean room that had windows that actually shut. Once again, I had a long nap right after checking in. This time I even had air conditioning and it felt amazing. Supper was at a typical Panamanian fonda, basically a grill that has a very basic menu and always a dinner special, which is probably pretty much the same day in and day out. Besides beef, beans and vegetables, yuca and patacones, a plantain variety, were on the menu. It was great. Well, the night in Oku was a bit of catching up on my sleep. I was about to enter the last leg of my tour, but there was still some time. Chitre, a town I had visited and enjoyed quite a lot the year before, was only about 50 kilometers away. I made the decision to visit an old friend there. His name is Mike, and he used to run his own hostel under the name Miami Mike's in Chitre. I remember this hostel and Mike very well, and with it the people I met there. A look on Hostel World just today revealed that Miami Mike's is permanently closed. I'm not sure whatever happened to Mike. He's an interesting character, easygoing and perhaps somewhat lazy, but knowledgeable about the area and always ready to help out. He once told me he moved to Panama from Indiana after quitting his job at UPS, in part because beer is so cheap here. Anyways, the way to Chitre and my visit with Mike is for the next episode. It is exciting to discover new places on a daily basis, but at this point I was really looking forward to see a familiar face. Hope you'll join me next week for episode 55. Oh, did you know this video is part of a playlist called Destination Central America? I'm hoping to write a book about this tour someday, but in the meantime, there are my videos. Enjoy another one if you like.